Well, thanks for joining us. Tonight we are getting the up-to-date information on voting in the election that's coming up on November 3rd. I'm Nikki, I'm the adult librarian on Forest Avenue. And I really appreciate that Erica Barz from the ACLU is here to teach us tonight. I'll introduce her in a moment, but I just wanted to go over the guidelines for a Zoom program real quick. So we have you all muted right now, and we hope that you will stay that way unless you want to talk, or unless you're going to talk. Just so that the background noise stays low. There is a Q&A time at the end, and if you have questions as we're going along, you can drop them in the chat, and we will keep notes. The other thing is just generally that the library is for everyone, and we always need you to engage in services in a way that allows other people to engage with them as well. So please be conscious of what's in your video background and know that things like repeatedly interrupting or harassing other people can get you kicked from the Zoom. I hope that that's obvious, but just in case. The chat features don't work super well. They don't have links, and chat can move past them pretty fast. But librarians love resources. So if you have ones to share, you can email them to me. That's my email right there. And I will also be the person sending you a follow-up survey. So please do that. All right, now that that's done, time to introduce our speaker. Erica is a Community Engagement Associate for the ACLU of Iowa. In this role, she educates Iowa residents about their rights when voting, interacting with law enforcement, protesting, and more. She also works to connect people with opportunities to help the ACLU of Iowa fulfill its mission to protect the basic freedoms and liberties of everyone in our state. Erica grew up in LaPorte City, a small town in northeast Iowa. Let's get started.
Thanks, Nikki. I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. I also have some slides. All right. And I think we're good. All right, so like Nikki said, my name is Erica Barz, Community Engagement at the ACLU of Iowa. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And today I'm going to be talking to you about voting rights, specifically leading up to the election on November 3rd. And I'm going to be giving you the most up-to-date information based on what happened in the legislature last session, and just making sure that you have the most up-to-date information. First, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the ACLU of Iowa. So we are a private, nonpartisan, and nonprofit organization. And the ACLU of Iowa is actually a state affiliate of a national organization. So the ACLU, the acronym stands for American Civil Liberties Union, is a national organization that has affiliates in every state and Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And the Iowa affiliate is actually the 5th oldest affiliate in the country. So we've been around for quite a while. And our mission is to protect the basic freedom and liberties of all Iowans. And there are a few different ways in which we go about fulfilling that mission. One is working within the Iowa legislature. So in the Iowa legislature, we work to advocate for bills and laws that will protect the civil liberties of Iowans, and also to defend against bills and laws that will actually infringe on people's rights. We also work in the courts. This is probably the part of the ACLU's work that people tend to be the most familiar with, is our legal work. So we do have a legal department, and we do take on cases specifically based around setting constitutional precedents that preserve the civil liberties of Iowans, and also defending the constitutional rights of Iowans. We work a little differently. Like the ACLU of Iowa is not necessarily like a typical law firm. We don't take cases that that impact only one person, for example, or like have implications for just like one case, but really look and make sure we take cases that have a broader impact and can sort of like impact the way the law is interpreted around the state. And then the last way that we work to fulfill our mission is through public education and advocacy. And that's by doing presentations like this, making sure that Iowans know their rights in a variety of situations. When they're voting, like we'll talk about today, when they're interacting with law enforcement, when they're protesting and demonstrating, students in schools, all of that, wanting to make sure that people really know how to assert their own rights. And right here, I've got the hyperlink for our website. This website includes a lot of the information that I'll be presenting today. So if you want to go back and look at anything, we have a Know Your Rights section dedicated to voting that you can use. And I'll be talking through a lot of that information today. So the ACLU of Iowa, since our mission is to defend civil liberties and freedoms, that puts us in a lot of different categories of focus. So some of the issue areas that we focus on include freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, racial justice, LGBTQ rights, students' rights, privacy and security, open government and records, reproductive freedom, religious freedom and separation of church and state, immigrants' rights, women's rights, criminal justice reform, and like I'll focus on today, voting rights. But if any of these other issue areas are of interest to you, I encourage you to reach out to me afterwards, and we can get you plugged into helping us out with fulfilling, making sure that people's rights are protected. So this is just like a quick rundown of what I'll be covering today. So first, I'll talk through registering to vote or how to update your registration if you have previously registered to vote but need to re-register for some reason. Next, I'll talk about voter ID requirements. Those are have changed fairly recently within the past few years for Iowa, so really want to talk through those and make sure folks understand them. I'll also talk about early voting options and also voting on election day, making sure that folks know all of their options for voting at any time. And then I'll also touch on voting rights for people with felony convictions. This is also an area that has changed even more recently. Just within the past couple of months, there have been changes on this. So I'll be sure to talk through what those changes are and how that impacts people with felony convictions. And then I'll talk about what to do if you have questions or concerns as you're navigating either registering to vote or voting itself or any stage of the voting process. So two overarching points I'll touch on just before we get into the agenda. But there are sort of two main steps here in terms of voting. And the first is registering to vote and making sure that you check and update your registration before Election Day. The easiest way to do that is going to be to look at the Iowa Secretary of State's website, which is listed there, or visiting your county auditor's website or office. So the Secretary of State is responsible for overseeing the administration of elections for the entire state statewide, while a county auditor is going to be responsible for implementing elections in one county, in their county that they've been elected in. So either of those offices is going to be a good resource for you when you're navigating this process. The next step in the big step in the process is actually voting itself. And there are two main ways to do this. One, either you can vote early, and you can vote early either in person or by mail. You might hear people use the phrase absentee voting and vote by mail interchangeably, and that's because voting by mail is a type of absentee voting. So just when you hear people talking about absentee voting, they tend to be talking about vote by mail. And then you can also vote on Election Day. And the polls are open on Tuesday, November 3rd, between the hours of 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. So first thing on our agenda is going into a little bit more detail about registering to vote and updating your registration. So if you want to register to vote and update your registration, you can do it before Election Day or you can do it on Election Day. So if you're going to be doing it before Election Day, you can do it in person by Saturday, October 24th. That is the pre-voter registration deadline. So there's sort of this 10-day period between October 25th and November 2nd, where you actually are not able to register to vote. If you miss that October 24th deadline, you will need to wait to do day of registration, which is possible, but that can be a little disconcerting, that just like that 10-day period in between. So just know that you can register day of if you need to. There is a paper form that you can fill out, that you can download and print from the Secretary of State's website, or county auditors' offices or websites have that too. A registration form that you can fill out and then mail to your county auditor's office in order to register. Another option for registering to vote is when you apply for services. And that can be anything from applying while you're at a motor vehicle driver's license station, while you're interacting with a state agency that provides public assistance, so like Medicaid, Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, also called WIC, or food stamps. And services for people with disabilities is also included in there as well. And you can also potentially register to vote when you're interacting with other state and federal offices and agencies. So that is another option for registering to vote. You can also register online through the Iowa Department of Transportation's website. In order for that to be an option for you, you need to have a current Iowa driver's license or identification card. So if you do have that, you can go online and register through the DOT. But if you don't, then you'll have to utilize one of the options that I mentioned earlier. You can also register to vote on Election Day at your polling place. You can, once you get to the front of the line and are talking to a poll worker, they'll have all of the paperwork that you'll need to fill out in order to register there. Next, I'm going to talk about voter ID requirements for voting. So voter ID. So in order to vote in the state of Iowa, you have to show an ID, and it does not necessarily have to be a photo ID, but you must show ID in order to vote early in person or on Election Day. So any registered voter can actually apply to their county auditor's office, or not apply, but contact their county auditor's office in order to get a free voter ID card. And there is no photo on this card. It actually looks a lot like if you've ever received a voter acknowledgement or a voter registration card after you've registered to vote, it'll look very, very similar to that. So has your name and the address that you're registered to vote on it. The ACLU of Iowa really recommends that folks apply for this voter ID, contact the county auditor's office to request this card, because this is actually the easiest document to use at your polling place when you're trying to fulfill that voter ID requirement. Because the two reasons why they're asking you for identification documents is to prove your identity and to prove your residence. And you can do that in a number of different configurations. You can have one document that does both, like that voter ID card that you can request from your county auditor, or you can use two documents if you have one document that proves your identity and then a different document that proves your residence. So for example, documents that are accepted that can prove your identity must be current valid, and they have to include an expiration date, so they can't be expired. But those documents can include a driver's license or an ID card, or you can even use an out-of-state driver's license or an ID card, as long as it proves your identity. You can also use a US passport, a military ID, an ID card that's issued by an employer, student ID from an Iowa high school or an Iowa college, a tribal ID, or that voter ID card from the county auditor that I mentioned. So again, the next part that you'll need to prove is your residence. So if the document that you used to prove your identity doesn't have your current address on it, you can use a different document in order to prove your residence, but it has to be within the last 45 days. So here's a list of the documents that you can use: a residential lease or a property tax statement, a utility bill that can also include a cell phone bill, a bank statement, a paycheck, or a government check or another government document. The big key here is that 45-day mark. So for example, if you bring a utility bill to the polling place, but it's from 2 months ago, so that would be 60 days in the past, that doesn't fulfill the proving your residence within the last 45 days. So you won't be able to use that to prove your residence. Again, that voter ID card that you can request from your county auditor's office as soon as you're registered to vote, that will prove both your identity and your residence and fulfill this voter ID requirements in full. What if you don't have an ID? There are options available to you if you don't have identification with you at the polls. So you can have an attester. So another registered voter in your precinct can vouch for your identity and your residence. So you'll go up to the poll worker and have this person with you, and they can essentially just say, yep, this person is who they say they are, and they live where they say they live. If you do that, you'll be able to cast a regular ballot and not a provisional ballot. The other thing that you can do if you don't have someone to attest for you is cast a provisional ballot. And a provisional ballot is a ballot that's given to a voter whose eligibility to vote has not been immediately established. So for example, if you don't have the proper voter ID documents with you. Just a second. If you're casting a provisional ballot, they'll give you a form that'll tell you the reason why you're casting a provisional ballot. So if the reason is that you are trying to register on election day and you don't have the proper ID, then the provisional ballot form will list like the same document list that I had listed on the previous slides, but will tell you lists of acceptable ID that you can either bring to your polling place before the polls close at 9 p.m. Or you can bring it to your county auditor's office by the deadline that is listed on the form, which can potentially be after election day if you're getting the provisional ballot form on election day. We do suggest that if the issue is identification and you have time to go, if you have the time and you also have proper ID at home or work and you just didn't have it with you for some reason, it's typically better and easier to go get your ID and then come back to the polls to cast a regular ballot. But the provisional ballot option does exist if you don't have another option. So students, what do students have to do to vote? So if you're a student, you either have to vote, you can register to vote either at your permanent address or at your school address. You should not register to vote at both addresses. And this is true of anyone who may have multiple places that they spend parts of their time, like as far as residency goes. You need to pick one. Other than that, students just have to meet the same requirements to vote as any other voter. And a student, as I mentioned earlier, a student ID can be a document that they use to prove their identity. But again, it has to be current, it has to be valid, and it has to have an expiration date on it in order for that to be valid. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about early voting. So any registered voter can actually vote before Election Day, which is November 3rd, and by filling out an absentee ballot. And that's going to be a two-step process. So the first step for submitting an absentee ballot is to actually apply in order to and ask to receive an absentee ballot. And you can do that anytime between July 6th and October 24th. So we are in that date range now. So if you would like to vote via absentee ballot and haven't requested one yet, you can do that on the Secretary of State's website or the county auditor's website or office. They'll have the form there that you can print out and mail to your county auditor in order to request your absentee ballot. The deadline for the county auditor's office to receive your absentee ballot request form is Saturday, October 24th at 5 p.m. They have to have received it by then. So the earlier that you can get that in, the better, just to make sure that you're not coming up too close to that deadline. The next step in the process is to actually receive and then fill out and send in your absentee ballot. So you can return your absentee ballot in a couple of different ways. One is to actually return it in person. So you can actually take it to your county auditor's office by Monday, November 2nd at 5 p.m. And that is a perfectly acceptable way to return your ballot. So that's the day before the election by 5 p.m., which is when most of those offices tend to close. So you can also return it by mail. So this is what people are typically talking about when they say vote by mail, is requesting an absentee ballot and then sending it back to your county auditor's office through the mail. In order for your absentee ballot to be counted, it has to be postmarked by Monday, November 2nd, and then the office actually has to receive it by noon on Tuesday, November 10th. Again, it's really important to watch that postmark date. If there is any question about the potential for your ballot to not be postmarked on time, it's typically better to return it in person if possible. But again, it's just helpful to be as far before these deadlines as possible to avoid any potential hangups there. And absentee ballot, the Secretary of State's office has indicated that they're going to start mailing people absentee ballots who've requested them by October 5th. So if you have requested an absentee ballot and haven't received it yet, it's because we haven't hit the date where they've begun to send them out yet. So if you've already requested an absentee ballot, you should potentially be seeing it not too long after October 5th. Next, I'm going to talk about if you want to vote on Election Day rather than voting early. So Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. And if you're going to vote on Election Day, you have to vote at your assigned polling place. You cannot vote at your county auditor's office on Election Day. It has to be at your assigned polling place. And you can find your polling place either on the Secretary of State's website, or typically your county auditor's website or office will have a list of polling places, and you'll be able to find yours there. It may also be listed on your voter registration card. And that is the document that you'll, if you register early to vote, if you've registered before Election Day, they'll typically mail you this document just to tell you, yep, we know that you are registered to vote. Also, here is your polling place. So it could be listed on there as well. So if you're voting on Election Day, it is required that polling places be accessible for people living with disabilities. If for some reason your polling place is not accessible, you can ask your county auditor for an accommodation. And if for some reason you can't enter the polling place because of a disability, you can send someone into the polling place and request curbside voting so that you are still able to utilize your right to vote. You also have the right to have anyone that you choose come in to the poll to assist you. And they can even come into the voting booth with you in order to assist you. The only restrictions on this are that the person that you choose can't be your employer. It can't be an agent or a representative of your employer, and it can't be an agent or a representative of your labor union. And that's in place just to make sure there isn't any undue coercion going on around your vote. Poll workers are also required to help you if you ask. And that's true even after you've entered the voting booth. So if for some reason you need assistance after you've already entered the voting booth, you can ask a poll worker to help you, and they are required to do so. You also have the right to bring an interpreter to your polling place, or get help in your language from anyone that you choose in order to cast your vote. And again, this just has the same restrictions as before. So it can't be your employer, it can't be an agent or representative of your employer, and it can't be an agent or representative of your labor union. You can bring your children into the voting booth as long as they're under the age of 18. And this is a pretty common phenomenon and a pretty cool one for folks to be able to show their children just just how to vote, how voting works, and just helping giving children that civic education is a really cool thing. So that is allowed. If you are in line when the polls close, you will still be allowed to vote. So if it's approaching 9 p.m. And 9 p.m. hits, but you've been in line since before 9 p.m., you stay in line. You will still be able to vote. It's just if you get there after 9 p.m. where you won't be able to. But since you arrived before 9, you're good. You may also be able to take time off of work to vote. If your work schedule doesn't give you 3 consecutive hours off while the polls are open, and again, the polling hours are between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., you have the right to take time off from work to vote. However, in order to utilize that right, you have to give your employer written notice before Election Day. And then your employer also has the right to specify which hours you may take off. However, your employer cannot penalize you or deduct from your regular wages or salary for your absence to vote. So those are sort of the parameters around voting while working. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about voting rights for people with felony convictions, just because, as I mentioned, this is an area that has changed recently. Actually, until early August, Iowa was the last state in our country that took away the voting rights for any Iowan that was convicted of any felony for life. However, on August 5th, Governor Kim Reynolds signed an executive order that changed that. And that executive order actually restored voting eligibility for most people with felony convictions who have discharged their sentence. So now, the way that things stand now, if you are a person with a felony conviction, you are eligible to vote in Iowa if you have discharged your sentence. And what that means for the purpose of voting is it means that you are not incarcerated. It means you're not on probation, parole, supervised release, or are subject to a special sentence. So that is what discharge your sentence means. So if none of those things apply to you, you may be eligible. You also cannot have been convicted of any felony that is under Chapter 707. And some examples of the felonies that are in that chapter of Iowa Code include murder, voluntary manslaughter, felony involuntary manslaughter, homicide, or serious injury by a vehicle. You can like Google Iowa Code Chapter 707 and find a full list of the felonies that are an exception to this executive order. So if you have committed if you've been convicted of a felony under that chapter, your voting rights haven't been automatically restored, but you can still apply to the governor's office in order to request your voting rights back, which is something that people with felony convictions were able to do before, and is still an option for people whose voting eligibility hasn't been restored automatically. It's also important to point out that this exception does not apply to non-felonies under Code 707. So, and that's true of anything that is not a felony. So in order to have in order to have had your voting rights revoked, you have to have been convicted of a felony. Misdemeanors, if you're convicted of a misdemeanor and not a felony, no matter what level of misdemeanor that it is, you never lost your voting eligibility. You are still able to vote, even if you are currently incarcerated. You can vote absentee if you are currently incarcerated or on pre-trial or something. Additionally, going back to how things stand now for people with felony convictions, you also do not have to have paid in full or to be on a payment plan to pay off fines, fees, or restitution. Now, the obligation to pay those things hasn't gone away. It's just not connected to your right to vote. So if all of those things apply to you and you are fulfill all of the other voting requirements, so you're over the age of 18, you are a U.S. citizen, then you're eligible to vote, and that's a new and exciting thing. Nearly 60,000 people in the state of Iowa have had their right to vote restored because of this executive order. You do still need to register to vote, but your process for registering is exactly like the process that I described before. You don't have to fill out any special form or anything. As long as you meet all of these criteria, your voting rights have been automatically restored, and you just need to register to vote and go through the voting process like any other person. Last, I'll address what to do if you have questions or concerns while you're going through the voting process. So the first thing is to contact your county auditor. You'll notice that that's been sort of a common chorus that I've been saying throughout this presentation. That's just because your county auditor really is the best and most useful resource in a lot of cases. You can find your county auditor's contact information on the Secretary of State's website. You can also just contact the Secretary of State directly if you have questions about voting. And they actually have a voting hotline that you can contact as well. And that number is 888-SOS-VOTE, or in numerical terms, it's 888-767-8683. You can also call the Election Protection Hotline. This hotline is put together by a national nonpartisan coalition, which the ACLU is actually a member of. And they are also there. This hotline exists to be able to answer people's questions about voting as well. And that number is 866-OUR-VOTE. And again, numerically, that's 866-687-8683. And then if you feel like your rights have been violated while you are trying to vote, you can also contact the ACLU of Iowa. And the best way to do that in that instance is to send an email to our legal department. And I've put the email address for our legal department there. It's legal.program@aclu-ia.org. By sending an email to that address, you'll have direct contact with our legal department, and also any communication that is sent to that email address is considered legally privileged and confidential. So that'll be the route that you'll want to go if you feel that your rights have been violated in the process of trying to vote. That is all the information I have for you tonight. For more information, just again, the ACLU of Iowa website, www.aclu-ia.org. All of the information that I talked to you about tonight is also on our website in our Voting Rights Know Your Rights guide. And you can find it all there written out if you want to refer back to anything. And then this is also my contact information. So if for some reason you have questions later or just want to get in touch, my email address is erica.barz@aclu-ia.org. And then my phone number is 515-207-5448. And with that, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I will say that I am not a lawyer myself personally, so there may potentially be questions that I cannot answer, but I'll be happy to bring them back to my team and get an answer for you and get that sent to you. So you feel free to ask, and if I can't answer, I'll let you know, but I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Hi, Erica. I'm Jen. Great talk today. I do have a question.
Yeah.
So all of my friends and coworkers, we've requested an absentee ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of worried that with accounting and the post office and all that maybe that was a bad idea. So we're talking about whether we are allowed to still, instead of using the absentee ballot, to instead vote in person.
Yes. So if you've requested an absentee ballot and decide that you, for whatever reason, that you no longer want to use an absentee ballot to vote, you can actually, you just have to bring your absentee ballot to your polling place or to the county auditor's office if you're voting early in person, just to be able to show like, hey, I was initially going to vote absentee, I'm not now, here is the ballot, so I'm not trying to vote twice, and they'll take that from you and strike it, and you'll be able to vote in person. So that is an option.
Okay. What do you think is going to happen if people don't bring their ballot with them?
In that case, that is probably a question that would, I believe in that case that you would be able to vote using a provisional ballot, but that is also like that's always a potential option, but there may be other options that I'm not aware of. That's something I can check in with my team. If you want to, if you want to shoot me an email after this, and I just so I have your contact information, or send it in the chat. Either way works. But I can make sure to get that information to you.
Yeah. Actually, no, I'll just tell all of my friends they need to bring their ballot with them. But I'm just I'm wondering in my mind, like what's going to happen when all the people like us or who didn't attend tonight show up without their ballot.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern, and it's also just something that's interesting because voting is such a state by state policy landscape. Things are different for people across all different states, so it can very easily get confusing, and that's part of why the ACLU is here, is to help people talk through voting concerns and just make sure that you have the most accurate information possible, and that county auditors are there to help with that too. So if someone goes to their county auditor's office and wants to vote in person, even after they've requested an absentee ballot, that's the best place for them to possibly be, quite frankly, in order to start getting that situation navigated.
Does, my guess is no, but does the ACLU have a recommendation for whether it is more likely to be, whether your rights are more likely to be acknowledged if you vote in person or by mail or absentee this November?
Yeah, that's not something we have a specific recommendation about. It's honestly, our view is that different voting methods are going to work best for different folks. Like there are people who need to vote in person just because that's how they, like maybe they have a disability and that's how they're able to get the accommodations they need in order to actually submit a ballot. Whereas for some people, voting by mail may be the best choice, just because they want to be able to vote early and sort of just like being done with it. So it's really just about each individual person and their individual situation.
Is that all? Are we? Yeah. Everybody good?
Yeah, no, it's good. I just want to say, Erica, also thank you. I've been voting wrong. My voter ID, my driver's license doesn't have the correct address on it, and I've always been able to vote. So I'll bring along my a bill or something that has my address. So
yeah, and that's also the thing. So the voter ID requirement is like most important if you're currently trying to register to vote. That's really when if you're trying to register same day, like register at your polling place, that's when you really need to have both of those documents. It's good to have them anyway, but the voter ID requirement is for registering to vote more than
okay. All right.
So that's likely why you've been able to
sign in. Good.
Yeah, like if you're on their list, that's like proof your residence has been proven because you've already submitted documentation at some point in order to get registered to vote. But
sure.
Still that identity component, yeah, it gets a little weird, but that's the explanation there.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so thanks so much, Erica, and thanks for coming out. We will leave the Zoom room open for a few more minutes. Tomorrow morning will be sending out an email with a book list about voting rights, and if you're interested in learning more, and a follow-up survey. We'd really appreciate if you take it, especially if you have any other thoughts about other kinds of things you would like to see from the library right now. And yeah, I hope you have a good night.
Great night.
Thank you, everyone.